Yes, and we could say something a bit about intuition, I suppose, because it's very important, actually. It's received a rather a bad rap in recent years due to the ingenious machinations of various psychologists who love finding what I call intuitive illusions, which are equivalent to optical illusions. You know, they look at it and think, it can't be right, but actually it can be proven it is. But as I've often said, I don't know that after seeing a really good optical illusion, anybody said, right, that does it. After this, I'm never going to trust my eyes again. I mean, you've got to trust your eyes if you're going to live. And the encouragement not to use intuition is one of the most pernicious aspects of modern culture. Of course it can be mistaken, but so can the simplistic following of algorithmic procedures that a computer would find logical. Reason is the blending of the ability to think in logical terms with experience and what is drawn from experience, which is all the richness that comes from being a human being, not a machine.
And I think that the reason they don't trust intuition is that a lot of it is an unconscious process.
100%.
I'm thinking, you know, there was a very interesting experiment where they showed a group of people Chinese ideograms, and then next week they said, we're going to show you some new ones and some old ones. Tell us the ones you saw last week. Hopeless. Then they repeated the experiment. The second week they said, when you look at the shapes, you'll find that some please you more than others. Just tell us which ones please you. And the ones that pleased them were the ones they'd seen the week before. So the knowledge was there at an unconscious level, but that's mistrusted by the left hemisphere because it's not in control.
No, not only not in control, but it's the one that has this spotlight of attention. The fundamental difference, as you remember, goes back to the ways in which the two hemispheres attend to the world for evolutionary reasons. One of them is intent on getting and grabbing a detail in order to stay alive, but the other is intent on seeing the whole of the rest of the picture, because if you didn't, you'd be very vulnerable. You wouldn't understand anything else going on in the world. So we have to have these two types of attention. But the left hemisphere spotlight means that it only sees, it's literally something like 3 out of 360 degrees of the attentional arc. So imagine a stage on which just a tiny spotlight, but everything else that was going on in that world, all the other actors, all the rest of the scenery wasn't visible. And as far as the left hemisphere is concerned, one of the very early chapters, I showed astonishing evidence from individuals who had damage to the right hemisphere, that something that doesn't exist in their attentional field doesn't exist. Not only doesn't exist now, by the way, but never existed before and can't be imagined to exist in the future. So an amazing early German, or possibly Austrian neurologist, Singeler, describes a number of patients who'd had right hemisphere strokes. And what he points out is something very subtle. It's known that they deny the left half of their body and the left half of space and all kinds of things. They're very strange. Now that arm, not mine if it's paralyzed, and anyway it's perfectly okay as far as I'm concerned. I mean, denial and the non-existence. But when they were questioned about the left side, they just froze and wouldn't answer any questions. And then he noticed that if it was suggested to them that they once had an arm on that side that moved at all, they totally blanked that and denied it. And they couldn't project that they could ever have one again. So this is really very remarkable. What it means is that as far as the left hemisphere is concerned, but not as far as the right hemisphere is concerned, a broad attention, what is not attended to simply doesn't exist, never existed. And that's philosophically fascinating.
Well, it's very true of science, isn't it? Because you remember that story about the man who's going down the street and he sees a guy looking around. He says, "Can I help?" He says, "Yes, I dropped my key." And he looks for a time with the guy and he says, "Well, you sure you dropped it here?" And the guy said, no, I dropped it down the alley over there. And he said, well, why are we looking here? He says, the light's better. And that seems to me to sum up a lot of science. It's behaviorism, isn't it? You say, what's out here in the light, and that will dominate psychology for 70 years. It's insanity.
Behaviorism is one of the most bizarre delusions that could ever have struck humanity, as Galen Strawson, a prominent English, Anglo-American analytic philosopher of the mainstream says, one of the weirdest things that could ever happen is to deny the inwardness of experience.
Yeah.
Because, of course, you can only do that using the inwardness of your experience. So, yes, but what I wanted to say is that we know that the vast majority, and I mean less than 0.5%, of what the brain is doing, taking in and knowing about is present to consciousness. And that we do a lot of very sophisticated things, not only mostly while we're not conscious of them, but we do them better when we're not conscious of them, which I think was what you were driving at when you
like doing your shoelaces up. If you think about it becomes much more difficult.
Lost, yes. Yeah. But there's a prominent German jurist, the head of a Max Planck Institute, who says that institutions should encourage their employees, wherever possible, to make decisions intuitively. Not just because we know very well that creative decisions are only ever, good creative decisions are only made intuitively. Which doesn't mean you don't think at all. That's not my point. You do thinking, you do a lot of work, you gather evidence, but you allow your intuitions to guide you to the conclusion. You don't force it. And the interesting thing there is he points out that when you speak and when you think explicitly out loud, you can only be thinking of one thing at the time, which is so obvious, frankly, that you collapse all that you know to this one thing that you're saying right now. Whereas in your intuitive unconscious mind, you are bringing together 20, 30, 1,000 strands from memory, from experience, about how these things tend to go and what patterns you do. And we're told now you mustn't trust that. And I think part of the worry is that we will jump to conclusions actually in the way that the left hemisphere does. We'll make quick and dirty judgments, but actually it turns out we're not that stupid.
But tell me, why does the left hemisphere jump to conclusions? I don't got that.
Well, it's part of its desire for fixity, certainty, and getting something. I mean, perhaps it would help not everybody here will have read The Master of His Emissary, so they may still be at the stage of thinking that all this right-left stuff is that nonsense that was talked about in pop psychology until I wrote The Master of His Emissary.